bore da pawb. Diolch am y cyfle I siarad gyda chi bore yma. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you this morning. I was a little bit worried for a while there. There were 6 of us on screen. I didn't realize that everyone was in a holding area. So I'm very relieved to see that once those doors were open, we've got some interest and some attendance. So thank you very much for your attendance this morning. And just broadening that thank you, I suppose. It is indeed a privilege to be speaking to you this morning in support of the development program for leaders in the education sector, who in turn, of course, are playing such a pivotal role in society. So I'm also aware I'm following in the footsteps of some excellent speakers. So I very much hope not to disappoint. And on that note, it's a personal experience that I'll be sharing with you. I think I came on to Dear Radar as part of an initiative I put together where I brought together a number of associates under the banner of Mission Possible, and the associates are all people who've been there, done it, got the t-shirt and indeed got the scars. I think anyone in a leadership position will recognize they don't always get everything right. That's very much the case. The further you go up the ladder, you hope to get everything right, but it's not always the way. And in that respect, what I'm going to share with you today, I suppose, is a very personal experience of a leadership journey. It's going to be honest. It's going to be real. It might be quite cathartic for me, actually, because when you're in a leadership position, the challenges that come at you do take their toll. And my hopes in terms of outcomes, I suppose, if I can tee that up at the beginning of my presentation, to give you some reassurance in terms of some of the challenges, some of the feelings, some of the experiences you're having as leaders at whatever level that may be. Provide some tools, perhaps, or some thoughts around how you might be dealing with certain situations. Maybe change some behaviors or reinforce others on the basis of some of the experiences and lessons I'll share with you. And I'm going to try and wrap all of those up, I suppose, in anecdotes and stories around some of the experiences that I've had. There is a heavy rugby thread. This is a session on the parallels between leadership in sport and business, and how my experiences in one have influenced my behaviours in the other, my approach in the other. And that's not fabricated in any sense. It's absolutely the case. It's something that I've recognized mostly to my benefit, but there has been a downside as well, which I'll share with you as well, in terms of team approach and leadership in one world, and how it doesn't necessarily transfer to the other. So with that context set, we'll get underway. And I certainly recognize that not everyone in the room, so to speak, is going to be aware of who I am, or my rugby background, or indeed my professional background. So this is me, as the song or the slide goes. And what we have on the left-hand side, which I'll touch on briefly in a minute, is my professional career. And on the right-hand side is my rugby career. And everything that happened on the right-hand side there, whether it was the 14 seasons with Swansea, or being fortunate enough to represent Wales, the Barbarians, etc. And you can see that there was some success that accompanied all that. All of that was happening during the first bullet point on the left-hand side. I was an environmental health officer by qualification, playing amateur rugby essentially, and I got appointed Swansea Rugby Club captain. And at or about that time, I was summoned to my chief environmental health officer's room, which usually meant I'd done something wrong, or there'd been a complaint or whatever. But on this occasion, it was a bottle of champagne from a chap called Eddie Ramsden, quite a character, great influence in my formative years as a professional guy. And Eddie was quick to give me the champagne, but moreover, he shared his thoughts with me about how my appointment as a captain of one of Wales's best rugby teams, I suppose, was going to serve me well in my professional career as an environmental health officer, and manager, leader, or whatever. And the fact that he made that observation probably resonates with me more on reflection now than it did with me at the time, but he was very much across it. He recognized it quickly, and he was right. There's no doubt that this leadership journey that I went on, both on the sporting and the business side, there was strong overlap and strong influence from one world to the other. Just to progress in terms of context, I suppose, how am I fit to speak to you about leadership? Well, I moved from the public sector into the third sector as a director of development with Gwaith Housing. That was then, actually. It's now Pobl, one of Wales's largest housing associations. That was out of my comfort zone. Brown greenfield developments, care homes, very large housing developments, but more importantly, there was no team there. So this was about finding, managing, developing and leading a team with a very ambitious development agenda in terms of spend and geographical reach, etc. It clearly went well because thanks to the success of that, I became an exec director, and the property management part that was bolted on then was repairs and maintenance across a stock of 10,000 units. That wasn't anywhere near as sexy as the development role. The world of repairs and maintenance in housing associations is a challenging one, whereas it was always very rewarding to 18 months after putting a spade in the ground to see that you were delivering social and affordable housing. So that was quite a gig in itself. Following a merger, then I left to become chief executive of the Dragon. Some of you will be aware that after my rugby career finished, I went on to Scrum 5. I was a broadcaster, journalist, writer around rugby, but I crossed the divide then into the inner sanctum of Welsh rugby and became chief executive at the Dragons. I went from looking about 35 to looking 55 overnight. And that was an incredible leadership experience there, which perhaps we'll touch on later. And having delivered quite transformational change there, I hopped back into my old world, but on the construction side, with a tier 2 contractors development director, which has led me to where I am today as a business development consultant. And I suppose putting those two sides of the equation into practice, there's my beloved Swansea RFC in the top right there, and Wales at the bottom. I was very fortunate to score a winning try on my debut for Wales, and at 14 seasons with the Whites. And it's quite fitting, actually, that there's a Swansea versus Cardiff game going on in that top right photograph, and that was one of the poorer aspects of my leadership, I suppose, which was Swansea and Cardiff had a big thing going on back in the day, and not at the heart of that was a huge battle, a huge rivalry between myself and my opposite number in Cardiff, which was the only time, I suppose, I put self ahead of team. I got distracted by the one-on-one between myself and my opposite number, and all the skullduggery, I suppose, that accompanied that. Which meant I wasn't doing my leadership role as well as I should be. And when I look back, I could see that I was getting caught up in the individual challenge more than I was putting the team before that. And then on the left-hand side, the Dragon CEO, and my world now as a business consultant, one of my clients is Gower College, Swansea, approved FE college in Wales, and college, and no doubt many of you are familiar with. And for those doubters, those that may be thinking, well, if there are parallels between sport and business, what are they? Well, rather than put these on through transition, I thought I'd throw them all up on the screen at the same time. And I will touch on a few of them, just to give you, some parallels. Decision making, I think, is an obvious one. I mentioned that, as a vice captain on the pitch, you get used very quickly to having to make decisions. And a lot of the time that I was vice captain, even my captains would be on the wing or at fullback, so they weren't really where the action was at. So a lot of what was being done on the pitch and why was because everyone was looking to me for, okay, what's the call, what's the play, what's the tactic, what are we going to do now? And of course, you find that in leadership in a business sense as well. How many decisions are you all making every day? And I suppose in a pyramid of leadership, the higher up you go, the fewer people there are to turn to assist you with that decision making. And when you're at the top, you look behind and no one's there. So any given day for any leader, decisions are coming at you all the time. And often those decisions are being made under pressure. There's 2 minutes to go in a game. You've got a 5-meter scrum. What's the play? Well, you feel that pressure. You feel the squeeze. You feel the need to get your decision right, to perform at your best when the squeeze is really coming on. Are you going to buckle, or are you going to grow? Are you going to rise to the challenge, or are you going to wither under it? Value-led behaviours. Make no excuses for spending a little bit of time on this. It's been something that was, I suppose, started for me in terms of my experience around value-led behaviours in sport, more so perhaps than business. It's become a big thing in organisations now. What are your values? It's also been my experience that I've been part of businesses where there are a lot of values written on the wall, written on the, alongside the mission statement, and they're token. As far as I'm concerned, the opposite should be true. The values that you sign up to on a personal level, as much as on a business level, they should lead your behaviors and they should lead your decisions. Very often people don't realize that, the values are a signpost to the calls that you can be making in certain situations. And it shouldn't be tokenism. They should be drivers for who you are, what you're about, and how you carry yourself. I think in both sport and business, leaders want to be the best that they can be. I think they want their teams to be the best that they can be. So that pursuit of excellence is certainly common to both worlds. I think rugby is renowned for its respect agenda. And again, this ties in with values. You often hear Nigel Owens as a referee talking about, I had 5'4", how we could command people that were 6'8" and 20 stone. But that was part of rugby's respect agenda. You'll often hear the contrast with football, where people are screaming at referees, etc. And certainly in terms of whoever you are as a leader, whatever you're charged with, I think, and it's obviously with well-being and bullying and all the things that are coming out these days in terms of challenges against organisations, I think a respect agenda should be the heart of how we all conduct ourselves at work. Things go wrong, crisis management. I'm going to talk about Swansea versus Australia later on, and we lost 3 props. We had a university prop join us for the biggest game of our lives. And on a pitch, things go wrong. People get sent off. In work, leaders don't, always have teams that are performing. People don't always turn up for work. Brown stuff hits the fan, as they say, and that's when your days start getting very testy. You've got a list of 20 things to do. They're all shelved because you've got a crisis. Happens in sport, happens in business. Trust and interdependencies. I think interdependencies, when you see it as a leader, when you see you're able to take that step back and look at your charges, look at your team and see how tight they are and see it working and see the relationships, the dynamic, the positivity. That's a wonderful feeling as a leader on the pitch, in the boardroom. And those interdependencies exist. And the better your team understands the interdependencies, the better it'll function, I think. And at the heart of that is trust. And I think you can tie trust in with delegation, and certainly in a rugby sense, you have to trust the guy on the inside to make the tackle he's supposed to make. She's supposed to make now as well. And I suppose in the business world, and certainly in the exec teams I've been part of, the senior management groups, trust is a big thing. And as a sportsman, I think I gave trust willingly, and that migrated across to business life as well. And maybe one of my failings with me, I gave trust and you lost it. You had one chance to lose it and it was gone, but I gave it willingly. The alternative, I suppose, is people have to win your trust. And there were occasions where my trust extended for too long and I didn't make decisions that I should have made. And I'll touch on that again later. And I think it's that whole trust agenda is an interesting one when you're a leader. Accountability and no excuses is well known in rugby circles for trying to make the environment the best it can be, so the players can go out on the pitch and perform to the best of their ability. And I think we all strive for that as leaders in work as well, which is to support our teams, make sure that they know what they're accountable for, but they've got all the support necessary to deliver against those accountabilities. And it also makes the difficult conversations easier then, if you know that you're supporting your charges with everything that is necessary in order for them to deliver. Team togetherness, I touched on this earlier on when I spoke about trust, and I'll mention it on one of the slides later. Team has always been very important to me. I've probably got more joy out of seeing a team or individuals within a team develop than anything I've achieved as an individual, and I think that very much harks back to my sporting life. Hard yards, later gains. We used to talk in the dressing room about 70 minutes of hard work in order to put teams away in the last 10 minutes. In other words, all the hard yards that we were putting in, against the wind or against a huge opposition or whatever, it would pay off because the last 10 minutes would be when we'd pull away. And that's been a mantra I've taken across to business when project delivery or particular weeks are difficult. You have to recognize what comes after the storm, and realize that you're going through a tough time, but the gains will come later on, and stay mission focused, recognizing that the outcome that you're chasing will materialize. One of the things that makes that achievement difficult, there may be some wry smiles here, but sappers and energizers. I think with any team environment, a leader has both of these qualities demonstrating themselves within the teams, within the organization. The energizers, of course, are the ones that are always up, keeping the mood right, always looking to support the delivery, keep standards high. And the sappers are the questioners, the downers, the ones that just take the energy out of the room. Nothing wrong with strong challenge, difference of opinion. But I think when I talk about sappers in a sporting environment or otherwise, we can all recognize them. And again, going back to my team approach and the trust agenda, this is where, when I look back, my team approach got in the way. I felt I could turn sappers into team players, but they weren't. They were well poisoners. They were bad apples, and I should have dealt with them more quickly, dealt with the situation more quickly, rather than feeling, within a team environment, it was my duty to take everyone along for the ride. Actually, my duty to the team was to make sure that the team was made up of the right people. And I can think of 2 occasions where that wasn't the case. Communication as a leader, especially when, going back to those hard yards, the crisis management, I'd much sooner be criticized for over communicating than under communicating. It's an important trait of a strong leader, and of course on the pitch, if no one knows what it is that you want, how are they going to deliver it? Dealing with failure, losing, or not being selected. We've all been there. Jobs that we've gone for, whilst you're part of a team, projects that fail, decisions that don't go your way. that thick skin that you need to develop, and that mindset of we go again. Big part of both worlds. The importance of structure as a leader, making sure that you know who, what, where, when, who are you going to give what to and why. Having the right people in the right positions. Very clear analogy there with sport. I spent a lot of time getting that right over the years in the many organizations, because time spent well around that as a leader makes everything afterwards so much easier. And delegation as well, the willingness to delegate, but the skill of delegation, I suppose. Are you giving, they say, if you want something done, give it to a busy person. Well, it's not always the way. You've got to remember what's already been asked of that individual, whether they're the right individual to deal with what you're giving them, but the willingness to delegate and to perhaps encourage an environment of asking forgiveness rather than permission, in so much as nine things may have been done the way that you'd like them to have been done. One wasn't. Well, that's a forgiveness, which is better than asking permission to do the 9 things that they took on themselves to do for the better of the team. Support networks, we're back to that no excuses environment, making sure that your charges are, have everything that they need to be the best that they can be. Goal setting and strategy, I'll touch on this in a later slide, but clearly a strong business driver. If you don't know where it is that you want to go, how are you going to get there? If you can't measure it, how do you know you're doing it? But I've always been a huge strategy guy, and I'll touch on later how strategy has been part of my rugby life as well. And the importance of enjoyment and well-being of self. One of the associates that's part of Mission Possible is Carwyn Jones, ex-leader of Welsh Government. And when I spoke to Carwyn about what it was that he'd like to present on, I expected him immediately to go to leadership. But he actually spoke about wanting to do something around well-being in high office. And that's because leaders carry burdens, both in terms of what they're charged with delivering themselves and everything that's going on in their team. And in respect of the team, the importance of enjoyment, going back to my rugby days, we played hard on and off the pitch, I suppose, but it's a very old school approach. But the good times we had off the pitch, I firmly believe, meant that we were tight and better on the pitch. So enjoying together has always been something I've tried to take across to my work environments. I talk about this being a personal journey. I wonder if you can spot me in that one. Of course, there's one guy standing out, isn't there, in red. And I look back at this. This was a formative year for me. Dual Shield, a competition that's, historically has been a fantastic competition. I'm hearing rumours they're thinking of binning it, which is unbelievable, because it's under 15s, formative year, and this is all the local authorities, this is Swansea schools, obviously. And I was made captain. I didn't ask to be captain, as far as I can remember, but the teachers obviously saw some qualities in me that they thought could thereafter. I was vice captain or captain in almost every sports team, rugby team I played in. But when I look back on this, it's clearly, a sense of elevation, yes, but also separation. I wonder how the teammates felt about the guy, the only one to be capped that year, captain, and perhaps having the plaudits, and I don't remember there being any difficulties, but that's one of the challenges of being a captain, being a leader, I suppose, is you're part of a team, but you're also separate to it. And this is where it started for me, I suppose. And back to that question, a leader's born or made, but thereafter I was on my way. And so it progressed up to the point where we get to senior rugby, and now some of the the influencers that I mentioned I was going to talk about, and this is Mike Ruddock. Now, Mike Ruddock will be known to many of you as the coach that delivered the first Grand Slam for the Welsh rugby team in nigh on 30 years. An extraordinary achievement given what had gone before. And Mike was the best coach I worked under. And a number of things I've taken through life came from my relationship with Mike when I was captain. So back in the day, coach and captain worked together. And I remembered that there was one time we had a big quarterfinal game to play. Mike and I picked the team. There wasn't a selection committee. Mike and I picked it. And 14 out of 14 we agreed on, but had a huge issue around the position of tight head prop. And Mike was explaining that he wanted to play player A because he was older, experienced, gnarly, he played well against his opposite number before, etc. And I wanted player B, a young buck on the up, more dynamic around the pitch, better all-round game, contribute more, etc., etc. And this argument went on, and Mike then conceded. He said, look, you've got to run out with him on Saturday. I'm going to go with player B. I'll let player A know he's not been picked. We go out onto the training paddock and we're just doing a little lap warm-up, and Mike pulls player A. Now, the easiest thing for Mike, perhaps, to say would be, look, I wanted to pick you, but Stuart wants to go with player B. But what Mike did was argue all the things that I had argued. He didn't sell me down the river. He didn't try and make that conversation any easier for himself by sharing how the conversation had gone. And he did that in the face of the player that wasn't being picked, actually arguing all the reasons that Mike wanted him to play in the first place. But he didn't buckle, he stayed strong. And my point is that as a leader, that's a strong value. It's easy to, to just play the big I am. I know something you don't know. I'm going to share with you something, even though it compromises someone else. Mike held the line, and the number of times, whether it's in a senior management team or amongst other chief execs, I suppose, when I was part of Welsh Rugby, where you know that either your managers were going to leave a room and share too much, or your peers in a chief exec role were going to immediately leak something because they didn't have the values that Mike demonstrated in that moment. And that was an important lesson for me, and it's one certainly that I've stayed true to since that situation. And Mike was also influential in another sense, where, going back to the values and behaviours in Swansea Rugby Club, there were no egos, there was no space for it, and the senior player group made sure that that was the case. And I was about to go into a press conference at Swansea captain, and there was huge debate over who was going to be picked to play Ireland in the first game of the Six Nations, or Five Nations as it was then, championship. And I hadn't been capped, but I was in the mix. And just before I went into the press conference, Mike pulled me aside and he said, listen, Stu, I know you're a humble guy, but you have to go into this room and be someone else. You have to go into this press conference and tell them you're ready. You've got to win the confidence of the selectors. You've got to win the confidence of the Welsh rugby public, but you've also got to win the confidence of the guys that you're going to be playing with, because I think you're going to be picked, he said. But don't be normal, Stu. Be positive, be strong. Don't hide your light under a bushel on this occasion. And that transferred into later life, I suppose, that as a leader and a senior manager, you sometimes have to go against your own personal traits, not your values, but you have to have a conversation in a way that wouldn't normally be your style. You have to say things that ordinarily you may not say. And you have to find a way of saying things sometimes that are uncomfortable, but you go with them because of the outcome that you're after. And these lessons from Mike, I suppose, have been with me through my later career. Interestingly, Mike taught me another lesson as well, and I'm sure you wouldn't mind me sharing this because we've talked about it. Going back to Cardiff-Swansea's rivalry, we played Cardiff in the last game that was to be played at Cardiff Arms Park, the Schweppes Cup final. Going back to my old rival, Henry Taylor, and Cardiff and Swansea were, hammer and tongs. And we lost narrowly, and in the dressing room afterwards, Mike came across to me. I must have made about 150 decisions that day, and Mike tapped me on the shoulder just as I was taking my shirt off, and said, "Stu, we had a scrum just on the halfway line there, and we did this play. Why didn't we?" And I just turned to Mike and said, "Look, Mike, now's not the right time," or words to that effect, because I was in pain. I was hurting from the defeat. And I think Mike recognized that, and it was a lesson to me about have the conversations, have the debriefs, go into those uncomfortable places, but do them at the right time. And for some of the more difficult decisions, or discussions, I should say, timing is everything. Staying with the rugby theme, the chap on the left is Alan Davies. Alan Davies was the Welsh rugby coach who gave me my first cap. And that first cap was out in Ireland, Lansdowne Road, a cauldron of a stadium. Wales hadn't been going very well, and you can only imagine, you dream, I suppose, of putting the jersey on and getting out there. I was fulfilling that schoolboy dream, and it wasn't in the easiest of settings, that's for sure. It wasn't a home debut. It was over in Ireland, where we all know how Ireland played back in the day. And I was in the tunnel, about to go out. The anthems come in and everything that you've got to deal with. And I felt a tap on my backside, and it was my coach, Alan Davies. And he leaned into me and he said, "Stu, whatever happens out there today, you're playing the next game." Now, the reason he shared that was it was a select and drop sort of environment with Wales back at the time, where one bad game and you were out. And what he was doing was empowering me to go out and play the game that I'd been playing to get me picked in the first place, not to worry about what if it went wrong. And it was the most extraordinary thing. It was the most effective thing that he could have said to me in that moment. Now, we may be straying into management more than leadership, but if you're a leader, you have to manage. And he could not have said anything better to me in that moment. Don't know if it was planned, but it was certainly effective. And it goes back to, sometimes as a leader, you have to ask yourself, what does a certain person need in order to perform to the best of their ability? And Alan certainly got that one right. We won. I probably wouldn't be telling the story if we'd lost, but we won, and it couldn't have gone better for me. So my thanks to Alan for that. And in terms of leadership, I suppose I talked about the All Whites. This is the aftermath of us beating the world champions at the time, Australia, back in 1992. I was captain. And this is probably in terms of leadership in a project sense, almost in terms of a mission, because we'd won the league the year before, and this was our focus. We were targeting this game. It was early in the season. We had team building and preparation in Canada on a tour, going back to the parallels. We'd spoke about the values, the behaviors, the accountabilities that we could expect of each other leading up to this game. There was separation of responsibilities. Mike was tactical and technical. I was all around belief and togetherness. Analysis, which we're all doing in a work sense, of course. They're the biggest team ever, the world champions. How are we going to beat them? The crisis management I mentioned earlier. We lost all our props. Performance under pressure. This is a big stage. Do you go into your shell, or do you get the performance level that will deliver? And it was also a case of success breeding success, I suppose. In terms of we went on to have a fantastic decade together. But it was also, as the story goes, anecdotally, how preparation can be quickly undone by an aside, and just in the dressing room before we went out, I reminded everyone that they might be world champions, but they're not invincible. To which one of the guys responded, "Well, that's a good job, because if we can't see them, how are we supposed to tackle them?" But you know, that's what happens when you've got some dull forwards in the group, I suppose. But it's I suppose I look back on leadership achievements, and for me this was the zenith. And then along comes John Plumtree, this gentleman, recently assistant coach with the New Zealand All Blacks, but he'd recently finished playing when he came to Swansea, followed Mike Ruddock, and couldn't have been more different, really. And he joined just after the game had gone professional. So you know, we'd been offered ridiculous money to play for Kerry Packer's rugby circus, and ended up you know, signing for a lot less for Swansea to play professional rugby. But I didn't believe, well, professional rugby would sustain itself. I wasn't sure. So I carried on working, which meant for me it was environmental health by day, rugby training by night, and you know, it was just too much. No one knew how to deal with professionalism, and it was on Saturday I was completely spent. When John arrived, he could see that, and he said, "Stu, there's nothing I can teach you. Give me one fitness session on a Tuesday, give me a team run out on a Thursday, and I'll see you on Saturday." And my form went through the roof. John himself said to me, "You're going to play for Wales before the season's out," which I thought was a nonsense. But he was right. And it was a lesson to me about, as a leader and manager, you cannot treat all your team members the same way. It was a brilliant decision around getting more by asking less, and realizing how I needed to be managed within that team environment, and having the strength of character, I suppose. I was being paid, and the natural reaction, if we're paying them, work them more. But John went the other way, and it paid off. And in terms of leadership styles, we've got two great characters here, piano pusher and a piano player. I wonder if you can guess which one is which. And I think, you know, that reinforces, you know, what is your leadership style? Don't try and be what you're not. So Garin was a follow me type leader, not an articulate speaker, or, you know, certainly didn't approach captaincy the way that Ieuan Evans on the right did. Ieuan was, you know, very articulate, very polished, very quick and pacey when you were playing against him, as you can imagine. But two great captains, all the same, and both equally effective. So it's not a case of one style fits all, I think, or you have to be a certain type of leader in order to be successful. It is true, you know, you have to plan and go against your natural instincts on occasion, as I mentioned earlier on. But inherently, you know, your style as a leader shows itself quite naturally. And these guys took it on very differently. And the other point that I wanted to make here is that I was, having been captain, I was vice captain to both these guys as well. Also, in Garen's case, you know, still making all the decisions around the plays. And I was vice captain to Ieuan with Wales. And they were both comfortable with how I approached that role. And I suppose the point I'm making there is that in order to be a good leader, you also have to be a good follower. Always, you know, despite having had that role myself, you know, deferential, my main aim was to support them as best as I could with the responsibilities that they carried. And I think if you're a poor follower, you're not going to be a very good leader. And the other story around Garen, before I leave this slide, is that as a leader, always be mindful of who you're listening to. It can sometimes perhaps be easy to dismiss or discount an offering from a junior member, whereas in actual fact, that might be the very nugget that you've been looking for. And that was the case with Garen when he first came to Swansea. We were going to a huge quarter-final in Neath, at the Knoll, a brutal affair. And they were known as the Welsh All Blacks. And Garin piped up in training one day, why don't we wear our away kit, which was navy? And we didn't understand where he was going with it. But his point was, if we wore navy, they'd be forced into a kit change. And that aura of the Welsh All Blacks would disappear. And that's what we did. And they were quite apoplectic. A character called Brian Thomas, who was their manager, was spitting pips. It was a huge distraction for them on the, before the game, and on the pitch, they didn't quite look the same. And that suggestion came from Garin, who wasn't renowned at the time for, his pearls of wisdom. But he was listened to, and it worked. And in terms of communication, which I touched on earlier, and what sport gives you. When I was in a dressing room in the amateur game, I would have a minor coming off shift on my left-hand side, still blackened from all the coal dust. I'd have a teacher or a solicitor on my right-hand side. And perhaps more importantly, not in the context necessarily of a team talk, but socially afterwards, culturally, socially, very different backgrounds, but a single team. And what that environment gave me was the skill to interact equally successfully, hopefully, with people from different backgrounds, different intellects, etc. And it's why it was very important to me that my children played team sport. Didn't care what sport it was, I didn't care at what level it was, but sport gives you that ability to interact well with different people. And it was certainly the case here that the challenge in the dressing room, or the dressing room environment, migrated readily to the workplace. And this is my band of brothers photo. It's me in the middle against Australia with the guys I cared about most. I mentioned earlier on that sense of team has always been at the heart of my approach to all the roles I've had outside rugby, and here I am in the sporting context, at least right in the middle of it. And that approach to team, that valuing team above everything else, is the single biggest thing that migrated across to my working life. It also demonstrates, of course, that as a leader, you're both part of a team, but often separate from it as well. And how you achieve that balance successfully, I think, is one of the greatest challenges you have as a leader when it comes to your actions and your efficacy. But when you get it right, as I said earlier, it's pretty special, and quite rare, I might say, that that you sit back and see that everything's in place as it should be. And just before I finish, I talked about having the scars, and I think it would be fitting for me to share with you some challenges of leadership as I see them. Having to be on it all the time. I think, yeah, there are natural leaders, but I hope you can identify with what I say here is that you're constantly asking yourself what it is that you need to do, when you need to do it, how are you going to do it, what style, who is it that you need to be speaking to, who is it that you need to be spending time with. You have to give so much of yourself to being the leader, yet at the same time you also have to perform yourself. And I think when you're on the lower, at the lower level starting out, and it's easy to be critical, you don't realize actually until you step into those shoes exactly what is asked for you in a leadership role. And they didn't say hello sentence here, which we've all had these experiences, is in terms of having to be on it all the time. It's that moment where you've just, walk past someone in a corridor without saying hello, and they're very quick to go back to the team. I said, oh, they're quite ignorant to me in the corridor. Why didn't even say hello? And they didn't realize there was no appreciation that the room that you'd just come out of was where you'd had to lay off 3 people, or been told that you've got to find £1 million savings on the budget. So it just reinforces really how the challenge of being a leader and being on it all the time. And of course, you are studied by all. Everyone's got an opinion of whoever's managing them, whoever's leading them. And in turn, because of that, your actions and your behaviours, they're mirrored. I think, mustn't underestimate that. They shape cultures. It's that trickle-down effect, going back to the pyramid. Who we are, what we're about, and how we carry ourselves does impact on how others do similarly. You set the tone and the mood for the workplace. Going away from sport, but perhaps to a wedding, if the bride and groom are relaxed and everyone's laughing, then naturally the guests are. But if we've all been to quite stiff affairs as well, where it's all very formal, and from the moment that you get there, there's hardly a relaxed moment. So, that culturally, I think we carry that responsibility in the workplace. Winning confidence in your leadership style can sometimes be a challenge, not least because you're not always able to share with people why certain decisions have been made, why something's being done in a certain way. Imposter syndrome we'll all be familiar with, and my goodness, that's a very real thing. Am I doing it right? Should I be here? Am I worthy of the next level in management and leadership? So if you're feeling that, you're not on your own. And then the politics of being a leader and relationship management. And yes, we all know that the office politics, that is happening internally. It's one of my big failings, is that my attitude was to turn up, be the best I could be, and go home, without realizing that around me, this world of politics was a constant. In some sectors, in some environments, more than others. And if I had my time again, I'd be more mindful of that, I suppose. And the need for relationship management, internally and externally. I think that's a very important role when you're in a leadership role, and especially a senior relationship, senior leadership role. And some of the most challenging things, I suppose, have been managing relationships outside of an organization as much as they have in it. So yeah, leadership, a wonderful thing, a great experience. But with it comes challenge, and I hope some of the things that I've listed and shared throughout my discussion have resonated in so much as they've either given you some thought on how you might approach certain situations going forward, or at least comforted you that a number of the things that I've shared aren't unique to you.